Hi, and welcome to Sparkle Tart.
You're listening to Kate Palmer, and today I'm here for the Lulu Art Design team, and I'll be showing you how to create a bold, vibrant journal page. Now, the first thing you'll need to do is tape off the edge of your paper with some artist's tape. Now, today I'm using a Strathmore mixed media journal and some Susan Shui artist tape, but you can use a low-tack masking tape if you don't have this. Once the tape is on the page, add an even layer of gel medium. Make sure it's the matte version. Now, while this is still wet, spray or drip in some of the Lindy's Stamp Gang Starbursts. I'm using Shabby Turbine Teal, Time Travel Teal, and High Maintenance Magenta. Adding these while the gel medium is still wet means that they grab a little bit more and won't be as easily reactivated by liquid layers on top of them, so you won't get as much colour bleeding. Now, the matte gel will remove the shimmer from these just a little, and it can change the colour just slightly, just so that you know. Spritz the colours with some water to move them around on a page, and once you're happy with the look, dry with a heat gun. Now, you'll notice that doing this will actually set the patterns and the colours into the matte gel, and you can get some really beautiful, beautiful effects. Now it's time to add a little bit more colour to the page, and I'm going to be using magenta from the Dina Wakley acrylic range. I'm just going to add it in little spots onto the background and then use a water brush to spread this around. Now, the key to this page is going to be variety. You don't want to cover the entire page with exactly the same thing. So I've added a little magenta as sort of like a light wash, and now I'm going to add the same colour through some punchinella for a bit of pattern, but it sort of helps coordinate it. Once you've added a little bit of pink through the punchinella, without cleaning your brush, add a little bit of the turquoise. The pink and the turquoise make a really pretty purpley blue colour, and this will be a little bit different but still colour coordinated. Once you've added a little of that, make sure you've got a clean brush and then add some of the turquoise, just so you get 3 coordinating but different patches of colour. Now it's time to add a little brightness to the mix. I'm using Hansa Yellow Medium, and this is a golden fluid acrylic. So I can add little drops of it onto the background, spritz it with water, and it becomes this beautiful transparent runny paint. So I'm going to add some water, and then after I've made some drippy bits with this by tilting my page from one side to another, I'm going to dry it with the heat gun. Once that's done, it's time for a little more of the Dina Wakley paint, but this time I'm going to add tangerine, just for something a little bit different. Now, once the tangerine has dried, it's time to add a little lime green, just for a bit of freshness and to really help brighten those colours. Now, you need to wait for the orange to have dried, otherwise we'll make a really interesting brown colour. Use your water brush to add the lime to various parts of the page and make it thinner by adding a squeeze of water from the water brush. At this point, I've added some of the Prima metallic accent semi-watercolours to the page. I've added some pearl and some purple, and all I've really done is mix it to a nice thin consistency and brush it over the top, creating sort of little patterns and just a little bit more interest. Now I'm going to add some of the blue and a little of the gold, and the nice thing about these is if you'd like to add them thinly, you can mix in quite a bit of water and just get a beautiful sheen like the purple here, or if you'd like to mix them up a bit more thickly, you can use them almost as an opaque paint. But they do get a little bit sticky if you make them too thick, so you might have to blot your finished piece. Metallic accents to both add pattern and highlight pattern that's already on the background. I'm adding small dots and little things that almost look like rivulets of gold and stone. A little bit poetic there perhaps, but you get the idea. Add some thickly, add some thinly. Use some of it as a beautiful way to add sheen and others as an opaque element, a metallic element. Have a bit of fun, have a bit of a play. While those metallics are drying, it's time to add a base colour for our facing page. Now all I'm going to do over here is spritz the page with some water and then add the same 3 colours of Lindy's Starbursts that we used on that initial page. So that was High Maintenance Magenta, Time Travel Teal and Shabby Turbine Teal. Once these have been sprayed onto the watery background, dry them with a heat gun. Now it's time to add a little design. I've used a white charcoal pencil to draw some patterns, in this case Frangipani's leaves and little circles, onto my background. And I'm just going to use a white paint pen, a Sharpie marker, to add these delicate designs. Then I'll be using some white gesso and the Dina Wakley acrylic paint in Night, that's the colour, Night, to add some depth and to block out some of the colour in the background so that the designs really shine through. At this point you can really start to see where the page is going. It's going to be bold, bright and hopefully gorgeous. The process I'm following is a little bit like colouring in but in reverse. So instead of staying in the lines, you want to stay outside the lines. And this is going to add an element of either pastel or darkness, depending on how much or how little of that night paint that you use. If you'd like a really pale look, you can use more of the gesso and keep it really light and airy. If you'd like something more dramatic and moody, something with a little bit more contrast, use more of the night. I'm applying both of these colours with my water brush, so I can add some elements of paint that are quite opaque and others that are sort of almost a vague wash of colour over the background. So some of that background will peek through. I like to keep it varied because that's just me. I like things that look a little bit different. You may need to do a few layers of this. If you keep adding too much paint over paint while it's still wet, you'll find that it sort of either blends together or doesn't quite layer properly. So add one layer, allow it to dry, unless of course you want to blend the white and that night colour for a grey effect. If you don't, add one layer, allow it to dry and then add another. You may choose to add additional colours in your sort of final layers, but start with just the two colours and see how you like it. See how it goes. The pastel version is pretty. I've decided I'd like to really amp up the colour. So I'm waiting for this layer to dry and then I'm going to add another layer using the night and no white. So basically I'm going to add a whole lot of darkness. So I'm adding the night around the edges of some of the elements so that it's almost opaque and it's really dark. And then I'm using the water brush to blend this out by mixing it with water until it's almost a glaze over the background layer that I've already got there. Now, to highlight some of the elements, I'm also adding in a little of the Dina Wakley magenta acrylic paint, and I'm using that in the same way as the night. And in some areas, I'm going to mix those two colours together. And this just makes the spaces between all of my hand-drawn elements darker, so it makes the elements themselves pop. Now, you might choose to create a background that's sort of half and half, a little bit light, a little bit dark, completely up to you, but the process is all the same. So you add a dark edge to an element and then use that water brush to blend it out until it's sort of almost just merging in with whatever your background is already. You can make it look really pretty. The water brush as a way to apply acrylic paint is absolutely fantastic, and I love using this in art journals. Now this next step is a little heavy-handed and there's probably a more elegant way to outline the designs, but I really wanted them to pop. So I've used a black extra fine Molotow paint pen and a white Sharpie marker to add outlines and a little bit of interest to the designs. Basically I've outlined everything using the black Molotow paint pen, and then I've used a Sharpie marker and a water brush to add some paler, more pastel elements to both the leaves and the flowers, just to sort of help to give them a bit of an individuality so that they look different from the other elements on the page. At this point we're almost finished. It just needs a beautiful quote, and I'm using a Donna Downey stencil called She Chooses, and I'm using black gesso to add this to the facing page. That way there's sort of a colour connection between the two. You've got that same bold element and the same dark element highlighting it. Now I'm just using a small brush to stipple this through the stencil, and it doesn't require any technique. As long as you don't move the stencil, you'll get a great result. Now all that's required is to take that tape that we added before we did any colouring off the page, and what you'll find is this creates a beautiful bright white border and really brings those two pages together. Makes a really big difference. And there you have it. We have a finished page, which is dark and bold, but still vibrant and bright. I hope you've enjoyed seeing how this journal page came together, and I'll be back with more soon.